Okay, welcome everybody to our return of Bible study, now at 6 p.m. Eastern Time. So very happy to be with you again, be very happy to be studying the scriptures again. We're starting with the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 16. So we are going to be hearing more about Jesus' activities as he is preaching and teaching and healing in the Galilean countryside. Remember, we said Galilee is that northern part of what's now the countries of Israel and Palestine, and it was the backwater of that area, which was already a backwater of the Roman Empire. So it's really, Jesus is out in the sticks, and the Pharisees and Sadducees have been, who are the more, they're like parties, they're religious factions within the Jews who are coming to examine Jesus. In some senses, like an unofficial or semi-official like delegation from the leaders of the Jews in Jerusalem saying, "Hey, we're hearing about this guy. What's his deal? Go check him out. Hear what," because it's really interesting. I mean, when you stop and think about it, we are there's a, and this is something that is really big to me. It is so crazy how much easier it is to get accurate information today than it is in any other point in history. Now, that's true. There's a lot of falsehoods on the internet. There's a lot of lies, manipulations, propaganda on the internet, without a doubt. But like, you can actually verify things in many cases a lot better than you could in the past. I mean, in the past, you really couldn't discern between rumors and news. You really it's really hard to get accurate information before printed word, let alone the internet or something like that. So they really have to go and investigate. It's just very, we really do have to realize that they're on some levels they're exactly the same as us, and on some levels they really are living in like a different galaxy. Like okay, sorry, letting someone in. Oh, Nick, the audience, it's your mom. Okay, welcome, Cheryl, Ksenia. Okay, so we'll just launch in. Chapter 16, verse 1. Then the Pharisees and Sadducees came, and testing him, asked that he would show them a sign from heaven. He answered to them, "When it is evening, you say, 'It will be fair weather, for the sky is red.' And in the morning, 'It will be foul weather today, and the sky is red and threatening.' Hypocrites, you know how to discern the face of the sky, but you cannot discern the signs of the times. A wicked and adulterous generation seeks after a sign, and no sign should be given to it except the sign of the prophet Jonah." And he left them and departed. So there's a couple things going on here. I've talked in the past about who the Pharisees are. They're one of these religious factions of the Jews. They're not exact. They might be leaders of the Jews, but they're leaders of an informal sense. They don't have a specific type of authority like a priesthood like we have here. They're more like, not that this necessarily really helps anyone's comprehension, but if you're familiar with Islam, they don't have an ordained priesthood. They just have scholars. They have a scholarly caste called the ulama. So you don't have, and anyone can be part of the ulama, but any man. It's just you have to have a certain level of like learning and education and understanding, and that's kind of what the Pharisees are. They're like a scholarly caste. They're not any kind of formal structure or priesthood, but they're just like a caste of Jews who know caste, caste, like a social order of really committed, really hardcore Jews, and their whole preoccupation is the observance of the law. Right. That's why Jesus gets on for them for their hypocrisy, because their preoccupation is that they want all Jews to observe the law of Moses in the first 5 books of the Bible in the Torah exactly, perfectly. And there's kind of this sense, I don't remember if this was actual doctrine they had or just kind of an idea that floated around, but there's kind of this sense for them that their redemption will come. The Messiah will come and rescue Israel once every Jew finally keeps the law perfectly. And that's why they're so obsessed with Jesus is telling people to break the Sabbath, or at least break their understanding of the Sabbath. And they're concerned about that because for them it's existential, right? It's a matter of the survival of their community. If they continue to abandon God's law, it's not just, oh, that guy's bad, he's a sinner. It's no, we're all going to pay for what he's doing wrong. So we need to shut him down. So the Pharisees are like a scholarly caste. very knowledgeable at the Torah, not any kind of formal leadership. The Sadducees are a different party. The Sadducees are more of a formal leadership for the Jews. The Sadducees are the party who run the temple. Remember, I said that ancient Judaism was actually rather different from the modern religion we call Judaism, in that it really revolved entirely around the temple and the sacrifices that were performed by priests at the temple. There has been no functional Jewish temple since it was destroyed by the Roman Emperor Titus in 70 AD, which lined up with Jesus's predictions of the destruction of the temple. Anyway, the Sadducees are more like an official body, and they're independent of the Pharisees. They're not the same teaching of the same things as the Pharisees. One of the big differences, the Pharisees teach that there will be an afterlife. That there will be in particular, they teach that there will be a resurrection when all the dead are raised. The Sadducees actually reject most books of the Old Testament. The Sadducees only believe in the Torah, the first 5 books of the Bible, and the first 5 books of the Bible do not anywhere clearly talk about an afterlife. There's some hint or suggestion there, but it's really not. It's really not plain. So the Sadducees do not believe that there will be a resurrection. Do not believe there will be an afterlife. The Sadducees, they're really concerned with pleasing and appeasing God for success in this world. They're the ones who challenge him. I don't think we've gotten to that part of the gospel yet, but the Sadducees are the ones who challenge Jesus with the idea of the resurrection. They say, if one woman was married to 7 men, whose wife will she be in the afterlife? And what they're trying to do there is they're trying to show the whole idea of an afterlife is ridiculous. And Jesus kind of exposes the error. We'll get to that when we get to that. Exposes the error in their thinking. But suffice it to say that the Pharisees and the Sadducees are not natural allies necessarily, because they teach different things. They occupy different roles in Jewish society. So they could even be rivals or competitors. But here they're united in their opposition to Jesus. Here they've kind of come together to kind of expose him or take him down or something. And so they're not natural allies, but they're united in opposing God. And this is really reminiscent of an episode that happens later in the Gospels, which is that Pilate and Herod become friends. Pilate is the Roman governor of Israel and of the region of Judea. Pilate is the Roman governor of the region of Judea, and Herod is kind of like the Jewish puppet king. Like he's in theory ruling the Jew as a Jew, but he's really just a puppet of the Romans. It's like a collaborator, basically. And Pilate and Herod were not friends previously, and then they put Jesus Christ on trial together and end up condemning him to death, and they become friends. The Bible says that specifically. And so it's just an interesting point that not all unity, not all like brotherhood in love between people is good. People can come together for bad purposes. People can be united by a mutual love of evil. So it's kind of a subtle point, but I think an important one. Not just because, what am I saying? Because what I see in a lot of like children's media and stuff is like it's all about friendship. It's so bland and deracinated that My Little Pony or whatever have you. It's all I have girls. My Little Pony, friendship is magic, but like really friendship is this beautiful, powerful thing. Friendship overcomes everything. Well, qualify that. Friendship is a beautiful thing when it's oriented towards a good, right? Friendship is not necessarily a good thing in and of itself. That's another thing. Another example of that we see in modern culture is they say all love is good. What's that slogan? Love is love. Not all love is good or desirable. What about the love between a man and a woman who's not his wife? Is that love is love? No, that's adultery. He should not have that love. He should not cultivate that love. It's possible for things to be counterfeit. It's possible to have bad friendship. It's possible to have bad romance. It's possible, like, just because something feels good, just because something fulfills this deep existential longing for connection with other human beings doesn't mean it's necessarily good. So that's a small point, but I just figured it was worth emphasizing. Yeah. Well, we've said enough. So what? Oh, yeah.
I've come to learn that looking through this particular lens is really important. Is one thing serving God, or is it serving man? it really has come down to that these two polar opposite things for me when viewing things like what you were just bringing up.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. How do you determine if a friendship or a relationship or something is good? Well, what's it directed towards? Is it directed towards God, or is it directed towards something worldly, like the acquisition of money, as you mentioned, or vanity, or just the satisfaction of physical desires? Like if it's anything less than the highest, or something close to the highest, then it's deficient in some way. It's deficient. So not all love is equal. Not just because something and just because something feels good and connects you with another person doesn't mean it's beneficial overall. So anyway, so the Pharisees and the Sadducees came and testing him. Actually, I did not look at the Greek for that. Does anyone have the Greek for that? I bet I would bet I can get it right here. Oh, I thought he was going to get it.
He's going to get the Greek from the basement.
He would though. Yeah. So pirazundes. So that's it's what I thought. Pirazundes. It's testing him. It's the same word for tempting him. It's the same word for tempting him. So when Jesus is being tempted in the desert by the devil, it's the exact same word. And you experience pirazmi. Oh, thank you. He was going to get it. Okay. Appreciate it. So anyway, these are human beings and they're playing the role of the devil. And that's like an important point, because sometimes people come to me and say, like, I'm being attacked by demons, and they'll tell me about something that's like very clearly a mental illness. Like one of the rules of thumb is that the devil only manifests himself to attack people under extreme circumstances. Other times, he acts through people in our lives, for those of us living in the world. And my goodness, if that's not the most true statement in the world, all of us have had the experience of, someone comes at us with just some kind of completely uncalled for, like, hostility or negativity, and it's out of nowhere. And you can say that the devil, it's not saying that this person is possessed or something, but it means how does the devil act in our lives? How does the devil act in human affairs? Most of the time it's putting a thought in their head. The devil put a thought in their head. They didn't get rid of the thought. They didn't dismiss the thought, but instead they allowed the thought to fester and to manifest, and then they come attacking you. So human beings can play the role of the devil. And in fact, most of the time when us living in the world are going to deal with demons, it's going to be through the circumstances of our life, or it's going to be through the people we encounter. Don't expect to see possessions. Don't expect the demons to appear to you bodily. Expect under extreme circumstances, like the really holy ones. Like Saint Iacovos of Evia, the patron saint of our metropolis, got physically beaten by the demons, like to the point where he was actually really seriously wounded, apparently. And his monks had to tend to him, because they just couldn't get him any other way. They couldn't tempt him internally, and they couldn't tempt him externally through people. So they just did the only thing they could, which is just to attack him physically. So anyway, so human beings can play a demonic role. Yes.
I was wondering, can the devil put things into your mind, like you're not a good Christian, or you should kill yourself?
Yeah, in fact, you should. Yeah, absolutely. And any thought of suicide is from the devil. There's virtually no circumstance under which suicide is ever looked on positively with the church. There's one extreme example, which I'll tell you about in a moment. But suicide, the devil's final objective is, because the devil has set himself up against God, which means he set himself up against life itself. The devil's objective is to destroy life. And whether he gets you to commit physical suicide by actually harming yourself, or he can get you to commit spiritual suicide through addiction, through bad choices. It doesn't matter. Either way, you've destroyed yourself in some meaningful sense. So virtually all thought of suicide is from the devil. The one extreme example that's happened is there have been times in history when Orthodox Christian women have taken their own lives rather than be captured for sexual slavery. That was the example of a lot of women in the Greek Revolution, because when the Greeks rose up against the Turks in 1821 and eventually won independence for the modern country of Greece in 1828. And one of the big things that the Turks would do is they were big into reprisals, where if the Turks managed to recapture a village from the Greeks, they would kill the men and sell the women and children into slavery, which often for the women basically just meant sexual slavery. And so there have been incidents in the history of like Greece, for example, but it's happened in other places too, when a bunch of women threw themselves and their children off a cliff. It's memorialized in a Greek folk song called Greek folk dance called the Dance of Zalongu, where the church doesn't look at that necessarily as a sin because they're avoiding some other kind of terrible evil. That's an extreme, unique circumstance, but it's a situation where the church is determined that that's understandable that you would choose that, and probably forced conversion was on the table too, like forced conversion to Islam. So it's really renouncing your faith, allowing yourself to be subjected to all kinds of humiliation, like the church. But any other situation, the church suicide is horrible, and it's from the devil. So any kind of thoughts of that nature are bad. Anyway, we went far afield, excuse me. But yeah, any kind of doubt, any kind of negativity can come from the devil. And we're getting thoughts like that all the time. Your issues are different from my issues, but I have issues and you have issues, and they're both from the devil to a degree. We also cause our own issues. I'm not saying everything that's bad is from the devil, because we do a fine job of causing our own problems. But ultimately, the source of all evil is the devil. So anyway, so the Pharisees and Sadducees came, but we said other people can act as agents of the devil in our lives. Don't forget, that also means you can act as an agent of the devil in someone else's life. God knows I have. And may God forgive me, and may they forgive me for it. Whenever we act on those evil thoughts, of any kind of negativity towards our brothers and sisters, then we ourselves are acting as agents of the devil. Anyway, so the Pharisees and Sadducees came and, testing him, asked that he would show them a sign from heaven. This means just a big display of power. It might literally mean they're asking to see something in the sky. Joshua's big miracle, one of the big miracle that happened with Joshua in the Bible. And by the way, Joshua is the same name as Jesus. When you read your Bible in Greek, it's the same name. There's no difference. Jesus. Joshua's big miracle was, a miracle where the sun stood still for a period of time and prolonged the length of the day. And that would truly be a display of cosmic power, right? If you're not, a human being can maybe do sleight of hand magic or something, but no one can make astronomical bodies. So anyway, that might be what they mean as a sign from heaven, or send lightning down. That was something that happened with Elijah. Lightning would come down from heaven on his enemies. That's another example of a phenomenon that even in the modern day, a human being could not control. But would be a clear display of God's holy power. And he answered them, when it is evening, you say it will be fair weather, for the sky is red, and in the morning it will be foul weather, for the sky is red and threatening. Hypocrites, for you know how to discern the sky, but you cannot discern the signs of the times. So what he's talking about now is just, it will be fair weather, for the sky is red. He's talking about just some kind of customary belief they had that you would be able to predict the weather based on such and such time, such and such signs you see in the sky. And so he's kind of playing off their idea of a sign from heaven. There probably is some truth to it. Like you can tell when storm clouds are gathering, even without reading the weather report or something. You can do some very basic level of meteorology. Obviously nowadays it's much more sophisticated with radars and this and that, but I'm sure in the ancient times, you were able to make some predictions.
I know that's a saying, because my dad used to tell me as a kid, red sky in the morning, say we take warning, red sky at night, say which delight.
Really
So
interesting.
Yeah.
So it persists to modern times. That's fascinating. That's fascinating.
Yeah.
So discern, is to make sense of, or discern, to understand, to make sense of. So you can know how to discern the face of the sky, but you can't discern the signs of the times. What he's referring to when he talks about the signs of the times is the evidence that the Messiah has come. I've been hammering this really hard if you've attended previous Bible studies, which I think most of you have, But there are many, many times, especially in this gospel, in the Gospel of Matthew, where Jesus directly references prophecies that show that he is the Messiah. So, Isaiah has a very special, very particular prophecy about how, the blind are made to see and the lame are made to walk and so on and so forth. And these are all signs of the coming of the Messiah. Another one I've hit hard is that many of the prophets predict that when the Messiah comes, Gentiles will become converted and will start to believe in the God of Israel. And Jesus, and that has happened many times in these gospels. And Jesus is, pointing out that this is a sign that something is changing. God's dispensation, God's relationship to the world is changing. God is, a new covenant is coming, and so on and so forth. So what Jesus is saying is, what he's trying to call their attention to is that, first of all, the signs are already there. They're asking him for a sign, and he has shown them signs. Things are happening, but notice that they can discern physical, worldly phenomena. They can't discern spiritual phenomena the same way. This is again a big division that you see everywhere in the Christian worldview. It's all throughout the Bible. There's a division between the flesh and the spirit. There's a division between the physical and material and the otherworldly and the spiritual. And you can know a whole lot about the physical. That's what a scientist does. A scientist in the modern day studies the natural world, the physical cause and effect. Scientists literally study the weather today, and yet that same knowledge does not necessarily apply to the spiritual. You can know a whole lot about the physical world and not necessarily know anything about the spiritual world. You can know a whole lot about humans and their behavior and not know much about the human soul. There's a division between the stuff of the flesh and the stuff of the spirit. So this is, again, it's Jesus doesn't say it directly, hey, I'm talking about the flesh and the spirit now. But once you get really familiar with the language and the concepts throughout the Bible, you see, oh, here's an example. They have fleshly knowledge. They have carnal. I've said this before. Carnal is a word that has come to mean like sexual in our modern day. And that's and same with like fleshy and stuff. But like the way it was used in the Bible, it was anything worldly, anything physical. That included sexual stuff, but it also included, just like food and drink, nature, natural processes and stuff. So that stuff is all, we would use the word carnal. And carnal in this case as opposed to spiritual. Flesh is the English word. Carnal is the Latin word. Sarx would be the Greek word. So it's all synonyms. It's just different roots. Latin versus Germanic. Sorry. Anyway, but you can't discern. Now, discerning, like we said, discernment is the ability to make sense of something, the ability to understand, to judge a thing. So discernment is actually one of the highest virtues in Orthodoxy. It's one of the most important critical things for wisdom. And it's so in the ladder of divine ascent, we have basically, there's a number of Orthodox spiritual handbooks, but if you had to point to the number one main one, it would be the ladder of divine ascent. Why do I say it's the main one in the Orthodox Church? Because in every monastery they read the entire thing during Lent. So it's the second most read book in Orthodoxy behind the Bible. It's called the Ladder of Divine Ascent, and it's just a collection of spiritual wisdom from the ancient fathers of the deserts of Egypt and Palestine that was collected by a particular saint named John Climacus in the 6th century. And he has arranged the whole Orthodox spiritual life into 30 steps. That's why it's a ladder. Each rung, and when you reach the top of the ladder, you get to heaven. Discernment is step 26. Discernment is step 26. So it's quite high up there, and it's considered a really advanced virtue, something that only the most wise, the most illumined are able to exercise properly. And like I said, on the most basic level, discernment just means the ability to rightly judge a situation. Discernment just means the ability to know when it's good to do something and when it's not good to do that thing. The discernment is the ability to know when something is from God, when something is from the flesh, and when something is from the devil. And this is critically important, because oftentimes we cannot understand the difference. It's something I was talking about earlier. People do not distinguish between friendships that are good and friendships that are bad. People say, all friendship is good because they get good feelings from it. And someone with discernment would say, no, you can get good feelings from a thing and still it be bad and overall not good. So the people who have that kind of naive, simplistic view, we would say lack discernment. They lack the ability to judge something critically, to judge with true spiritual eyesight. Discernment concerns when and how to exercise which virtues and other things. Like, as you know, as you probably know, hopefully know, in the Orthodox Church, we have a lot of rules, a whole lot of rules. And that govern everything, you know, from like how we behave in church to what we eat to what we do on certain days of the week. And discernment, and what you should also know as an Orthodox Christian is that we are not legalists, you know, contrary to the Pharisees. We believe that these rules are important. We do not believe that they are always good in all situations. There are times when it's healthy and appropriate to relax the fasts. There are times when it's healthy and appropriate, Friday, every Friday is a fast day, and almost every Friday of the year is a fast day in commemoration of Jesus Christ's crucifixion. It's really bad, you know, to not take Jesus' crucifixion seriously. However, there are circumstances in your life where it might make sense to break the fast on a Friday, to avoid offending someone, to avoid, you know, a health issue, to avoid there. And so discernment in that situation would be the knowledge of how to make that call. How's it going, Alejandro? Welcome. Discernment is the ability to, we distinguish, by the way, in Orthodoxy between two variants of the rules. There's akrivia, which is exactness, and there's economia, which is like leniency, basically. Literally, it's translated economy, but it means like leniency. And all rules in the Orthodox Church can be applied according to akrivia, according to exactness, or according to economy. And discernment is the ability to judge when each is right. Because everyone can come up with a justification for why we need strictness or why we need leniency. You know, any half-baked lawyer can argue his way into a certain proposition. Discernment is the ability to judge with God's will. And that's why discernment is an extremely high virtue, and very few people have it in the full sense. All of us, God willing, have some level of discernment, but really only the advanced have a perfection of discernment. And that it governs especially our approach to spiritual phenomena. This extreme reverence for discernment governs our approach to spiritual phenomena. The Orthodox Church is extremely cautious about spiritual phenomena. We're talking visions, we're talking feelings, we're talking, you know, premonitions, we're talking even miracles. We are extremely cautious about all of these kinds of things, while 100% affirming their reality. We do believe miracles happen, but not everything that's called a miracle is a miracle. We do believe miracles happen, but that doesn't mean everything that's supernatural is from God. We really are extremely cautious. I've had people come in confession talk to me about real remarkable events that happened to them that seem to be of a supernatural character. And I tell them, well, I don't know what to do about this. Let me talk to my own spiritual father. And then I talk, you know, who's a wise and holy man. He gets advice. You know what he says? In one ear and out the other. Don't pay attention to it. If it was a miracle, glory to God. If it wasn't a miracle, glory to God. That's not what our life is about. Our life is not about seeing visions. It's not about experiencing miracles. Our life is about serving God, and you can do that with or without miracles. You can do that with or without visions. You can do that with or without any of the sort of dazzling stuff. So we're extremely cautious while 100% believing such things happen. Why? Because you could be wrong. You could be deceived by the devil. In fact, I think that happens a lot. And I've been trying to formulate my thoughts on the subject. But if you get really down the interesting rabbit hole of anything paranormal in the modern day, whether it's UFO stuff or psychic phenomena, there's a whole field dedicated to this stuff called parapsychology. It starts with real phenomena. Actually, people who experience UFOs, who experience psychic phenomena, oftentimes that stuff actually is real. It does occur. But then their judgment of it, their understanding of it goes completely off the rails because they completely lack discernment. They don't have an Orthodox mindset. Oftentimes they don't have any faith at all. And therefore they come up with all kinds of wild theories or get into all kinds of practices because they were right that something happened to them, but they weren't able to treat it cautiously. They weren't able to treat it with discernment. So discernment's a very high virtue. There are two poles. There are two poles that we Orthodox avoid. One is total skepticism. The idea that no miracles ever happened, the idea that there's no supernatural reality. Of course, that's false. That's not true. Things like this manifestly do happen. On the other hand, we avoid naive belief. We avoid taking something at face value. Just because something happened to you that appears to be a miracle doesn't mean it was a miracle, and it doesn't mean it was good. Sometimes it does. Like when an icon exudes myrrh miraculously, it's investigated by a bishop, and it can be determined that the miracle continues to happen or not. And when he'll take the icon away. And if you take the icon away, it stops exuding holy oil. Well, then it's reasonable to conclude there's probably fraud involved. Maybe not, but almost certainly the conclusion. Next, other times they'll take it and it'll continue to exude myrrh, but then they'll do an exorcism in front of it, and it stops. Well, it's like, okay, well then it was a miracle, but it wasn't from God. And then other times, but then finally, if it passes those two tests and they're able to put it in the church and it continues to produce the miracle, then they can sign off and say, okay, this is an actual miracle from God. But you don't just run after it the first time someone says it. You take it away and deal with it in secret. So discernment is extremely important. Discernment is extreme. That's it. That's the whole point I wanted to make. But you made me talk so long. Verse 4, a wicked and adulterous generation seeks after a sign, and no sign shall be given to it except the sign of the prophet Jonah. And he left them and departed. Notice again, I feel like we hammer the same things again and again, but it's the same themes come up again and again. He calls them wicked. He also calls them adulterous. What does it mean by adulterous? Are they all cheating on their wives or something? Well, maybe, but not necessarily. The more important thing here is that God repeatedly refers to his people as his bride. This was true of Israel, and it's true of the church too. The church is the bride of Christ. Of course, the church is just a continuation of the ancient Israel. But there's this marital imagery that's used to connect about the connection between God and man. And that's because, what happens when a man and a woman are joined together? Well, they're joined together in the deepest possible way. A man and a woman can come together in a way that no other human beings can, except maybe, in a different sort of way, a mother with her child. But other than that, there's no more intimate relationship a human being can have with another one. And God is saying that should be an archetype for that's a reflection or an archetype of what he does with us. Not that God's relationship with us is sexual, but that it's completely intimate on the very level. When we have a relationship with God, it goes down to the very level of our being. It goes down to the core of what we are. And so when you turn away from God or you betray God, that's a sort of adultery. That's turning your back on the person with whom you share the deepest possible intimacy. And that's a worse kind of betrayal. Obviously, everyone thinks it's much worse to betray your wife than it is to betray your business partner. So it's bad to betray your business partner too. But there's something much more deep, much more intimate about when a family gets broken up in that way. And so when we turn away from God, it's the worst sort of betrayal. It's like that's a good question, Christina. We are using the Orthodox Study Bible, which for the New Testament uses the New King James Version. We're on verse 16, chapter 4. So let me see if I can. So it's Yenea ponera ke Michalis, which as far as I understand only means adulteress. So, she had the NLT in front of you. Yeah, I don't know anything. I don't know my Bible translation super well, but yes. But anyway, so God's relationship to his people is like a marriage because it is the deepest possible relationship. And that's why it's a relationship you have to take super seriously. And that's why we make in the Orthodox Church, everyone who wants to be baptized, wait minimum 1 year from the time you start attending, because you are entering in a relationship that is as serious as a marriage. And I tell everyone, you better die an Orthodox Christian. You better die an Orthodox Christian. I'm looking all of you in the eye when I say that, because you are married now to the church. Well, those of you who've been baptized are married now to the church. And when you ate Jesus's body and blood of communion, you became one flesh to him. Again, that's like the relationship of a husband to wife. You became one flesh. You took his flesh, digested it, and in digesting it, it became part of you. So you are joined to him, and that's why it's the most serious possible thing would be to leave him and betray him. So when God calls, when God refers to his relationship to mankind in terms of husband and wife, he's not talking about the physical dimension of that. He's talking about this is the most intimate possible union. And that's, I hate to even bring it up, but that's kind of important because some people, there are some texts, there's some spiritual texts in the Orthodox Church which will talk about the union of God and man, not super explicitly, but they'll use some of these concepts of like eros, like even the word erotic to describe the union of man's soul with God, and they'll take it in a totally weird direction. And it's there's no arousal at all. It's about the intimacy. It's about the depth of the joining of these two things. Don't be weird. But it's because we've just totally brought everything. I mean, we only in the modern day we only view the relationship of a husband and wife, of a man and woman, in the most base terms possible, in the most crude terms possible, when it really is, even in ordinary human marriage, is actually a very sacred thing and a very beautiful thing. And it's just we've so perverted the way we look at it that we can't, when the fathers are writing it, they're little lambs. They're so innocent when they're writing. They don't think that we're going to project our nastiness onto it, but by goodness we can. Anyway, so, and no sign shall be given to it except the sign of the prophet Jonah. And so it's really interesting. Jesus is using hyperbolic language here, and this is not the only time Jesus. What do we mean by hyperbolic? We mean Jesus is exaggerating. Why do we say that? Well, it's because he has actually given them many signs. He says no sign will be given to you. Actually does a bunch of signs. Like throughout the whole Bible, he's been doing the whole gospel. He's been doing signs. His very birth was a sign. But he's not giving signs to them who he's talking to specifically. And he gives many signs, but not to those who are testing him, not to those who are testing him for the purpose of testing him. He does give signs to people. I really believe God gives signs. I believe there's a degree to which I've experienced it, and there are others who've experienced it even much more deeply. God does give signs to those who need it and to those who seek it after it, to the exclusion of anything else. But not merely for the purpose of satisfying your curiosity. Yes.
You almost say that the no sign thing is like from their perspective, like they don't see any signs.
Yeah, that's a good point. It's almost more about them than about him. That's really interesting. Yeah, because there are plenty of signs. They don't see a single one though.
They lack discernment.
And so I think no sign will be given to them. I think it's not that different today. I've said this many times, but I think some people can have these really. I mean, saints alive today have seen God. It's not just they believe God exists; they know that there's a God. And yet there's some people who write whole books to say there's no God. It's a ridiculous idea. And it's like, how can these two people exist in the same universe? Well, it's because the God is really, really selective about how he gives out his grace. And you can both have that experience about reality, and you can even be honest about your experience. That could even be your honest experience about reality, but that doesn't say anything about the limits of reality. It says something about the limits of your vision and what God has revealed or not revealed to you. Very interesting. But notice overall, I think, so except the sign of the prophet Jonah. Now, I've covered this in a previous Bible study because Jesus references the sign of the prophet Jonah before, so I won't get too deep into it. But when he's talking about the sign of the prophet Jonah, he's referring to his own death and resurrection. That's what he means. What does he mean? He means that Jonah was 3 days and 3 nights in the belly of the sea beast. We often translate it whale, but I don't think they had that vocabulary. Just literally, I think it's just sea beast. Might have been a whale, but Leviathan, maybe.
Yeah.
Who am I to say it wasn't?
Yeah.
But Jonah was 3 days and 3 nights in the belly of the sea beast. Then he prayed to God. And then the sea beast vomited him back out on shore, and then he went to the Ninevites, preached repentance to them. One of the things that's often overlooked is that it never says Jonah survived the being swallowed by a sea beast, because you wonder, well, how could he survive? It must have been a miracle. Well, he could have, but if you actually read the prayer Jonah says to God from the belly of the sea. Actually, it sounds like he's dead, because he talks about going to the depth of Hades, which might just refer to the beast going down, but it seems like he's really going. Jonah died and went to the realm of the dead. What am I trying to say? Jonah, more or less, for all intents and purposes, he died and was resurrected. He was chewed up, eaten, and swallowed, went down to the realm of the dead, and then was vomited back out alive. Again, go read the prophecy of Jonah. It's a very short book. And read the prayer Jonah says. It really sounds like he dies. So what he's referring to is that Jonah's death and resurrection was a foreshadowing of his own. And that's also extremely interesting, by the way. This is just another one of those points I like to bring up. You know, the book of Jonah was written 500, 600 years before the coming of Christ, and parallels his story remarkably well within at least this one specific, actually, there's more dimensions. That really is cool. Dig into the Old Testament prophecies, and you will start like not just on a superficial level, just like read snippets of them, but like read the whole thing, and you will see really fascinating parallels. You know, Jonah died and was raised, and after he was raised, he went and he preached repentance, not to Jews, but to Gentiles. And that was Jesus' whole thing, that he died and was raised, and after he was raised, and he preached not exclusively to Jews, but especially to Gentiles. Like it's crazy that these things parallel centuries apart. And it's not the only one. You'll find many more when you get into the prophecies. So Sarah Mitchell, very interesting. Yeah, it's fascinating. The Bible is a cool book. Like I keep emphasizing, it's really neat. Like, and it rewards, and the Bible rewards like greater knowledge of the Bible. Like the more you know, the more interesting it is to read. I think the hardest, the Bible is most boring to read when you don't know anything about it, because you're just confused and you can't make sense of anything. The Bible is a really cool book. So anyway, when he says no sign will be given to it except the sign of the prophet Jonah, he's referring to it's oblique, it's kind of cryptic, but it's not that cryptic. I mean, the Jews would have understood that Jonah went through something like a death and resurrection, even if they didn't fully understand that it was a death and resurrection. And he's saying, I'm going to do that, not inside of a sea beast, but into the belly of the earth, you know, as he says. Jonah went into the heart of the sea. Jesus went into the heart of the land. There's something there. It's something interesting, you know, because the Bible's always contrasting the sea and the land. You know, it's what God does on day 3, as he separates the sea from the land. Anyway, so many interesting like threads you could follow, but I can't follow right now, right? Because we're in the middle of this. But I think this whole passage is representative, because remember, I say, like, when we're reading in the Gospels, you should look for, in addition to the, you know, individual historical facts, you should look to the general truths. And what is the general truth here? I think it's the general spiritual of tendency of humans to continually demand proofs. Because as we said, Jesus did give them signs. He did give them evidence. He did give them miracles. They would have been justified in believing him. But they're like, we just want one more. We just want one more. And I've discerned this tendency in my own self, if I'm being perfectly honest. I always want to see more. I'm always, I feel like, in my own spiritual life, saying like, that was pretty good, God, but how about, you know, but how about more? How about even better? Even when I have everything I need, even when he has blessed me immensely in some big ways, I'm so greedy. And I think this is a reminder that there's a certain point where we just need to stop and accept. Because otherwise our hunger will just be bottomless. And now, of course, God is willing to satisfy our hunger, right? God is willing to give us everything we want. God desires to reveal himself to us, but we don't accept the proportionality of it. Like, we want everything for a very, very small amount of work. And he reveals himself, he gives himself to us in proportion to our willingness to exert ourselves. Yes.
How do you juxtapose that with like the genuine desire to know God more? Like to seek after more spiritual experience, like that kind of stuff. Yeah. Yeah. I think the difference from what I would gather here, and of course I'm not a holy elder, would be that the difference is the one has lingering doubt, the other doesn't. The one wants more signs because he's not ready to commit himself 100%. He's holding back a little bit of something. And I think all of us in our faith, insofar as we're perfect, we're all holding back a little bit. I think I'm holding back a little bit in my faith. I absolutely believe, and I think everyone else here believes, but until we're perfected, we lack something, right?
our faith is missing something. And I think the difference between us and the saints is they lack nothing. There's no, they just want more and more and more because they're so greedy for the experience of God. They don't want any kind of confirmation or proof. They just love him so much they want more of him. And I think that's the kind of longing for a sign that God obliges, because it's with complete trust. It's with complete surrender. And I don't think we've surrendered 100%. Why? Because if we've surrendered 100%, we'd never sin again. Ever. We live perfectly in harmony with his will. But insofar as you continue to sin, insofar as I continue to sin, in any way, there's some lack in my faith. Because if my faith were perfect, I would, even in the smallest thing, wouldn't sin. So God does give us proof and evidence, but will not indulge us more than we're willing to struggle for it, more than we're willing to trust him. Only in certain exceptional circumstances, like with St. Paul, who had absolutely no faith at all, God still revealed himself to him. Most of the time, that does happen sometimes. Some people are converted in dramatic ways. But for most people, most of the time, that's not how it works. We have to have some willingness just to trust, and then God gives us. We have enough evidence to make but also notice that we have enough evidence to make practical decisions. We have enough evidence to decide what we think the sky is going to be, but what the weather's going to be like based on what we can see. But when it comes to God, we just want more and more and more, even when he gives us enough. Lord of mercy. Okay, that's enough. That's enough for those 4 verses. Anything? Gosh, only 4 verses. Okay, we'll keep going. We'll finish the next section. Okay, we'll move on. So now, when his disciples had come to the other side, they had forgotten to take bread. And then Jesus said to them, "Take heed and beware of the leaven of the Pharisees and the Sadducees." And they reasoned among themselves, saying, "It is because we have taken no bread." But Jesus, being aware of it, said to them, "O you of little faith, why do you reason among yourselves because you have brought no bread? Do you not yet understand or remember the 5 loaves of the 5,000, and do not men how many baskets you took up, nor the 7 loaves of the 4,000, how many large baskets you took up? How is it you do not understand that I did not speak to you concerning bread, but to beware of the leaven of the Pharisees and Sadducees?" Then they understood that he did not tell them to beware of the leaven of bread, but of the doctrine of the Pharisees and Sadducees. Okay, so just to get out of the way, leaven is yeast. Leaven's just a term for yeast. So it's, for those of you who don't know, leaven. I assume all of you know, but maybe some of you don't. Yeast is just what you put in bread that puffs it up. So when you don't, before you've added yeast or leaven to bread, to dough, it's just like flat. Like Play-Doh. You put bread in it, you put yeast in it, and then puffs up over time. And you have to let it sit for a little while. It doesn't happen immediately. So, my mother-in-law bakes bread at our house all the time. And so I'll just come home to like a pot of, dough sitting on the couch, and it's just like chilling there because it's just waiting to rise. And I think that's important for our discussion. It takes time. Yeast takes time to do its work. And what it is it's bacteria, right? Or some kind of, it's a fungus. Oh, interesting. Okay. It's a fungus. Well, it's some kind of living organism that's, eating and digesting sugars, and in that process producing air, and the air is producing the bubbles in your bread. And they reason among, now we'll go just straight to verse 8. But Jesus, being aware of it, said to them, so the disciples reasoned among themselves, saying, "It is because we have taken no bread." So Jesus is talking about beware of the leaven of the Pharisees and Sadducees, and he's just, they don't understand what he's saying. Basically, they're like, "Oh, he's mad at us because we didn't bring bread," or something to that effect. But Jesus, being aware of it, said to them, "O you of little faith, why do you reason among yourselves because you haven't brought no bread?" So they misunderstand. And why do they misunderstand? Jesus says it's because they have no faith. That's really interesting. Because what does faith have to do with the ability just to comprehend, language? And it has to do with, in general, with the way Jesus speaks, right? Jesus speaks cryptically. Like, we've encountered that again and again in the Gospels. Not everything he says is straightforward. Not everything he says makes sense. So I guess they're kind of used to having to figure out and you have to think that, like, this would be the case. If God did come to earth, would he be perfectly intelligible to us all the time? No, probably not. It's a miracle that he is intelligible to us at all, because he's so far above and beyond us. Like, how can he even communicate with us? But of course, he's infinite in his wisdom, so he finds a way. Oh, you have little faith. So Jesus said they misunderstand because they lack faith. There's a worldly way to understand this, which I think is valid and important. The worldly way is that, well, when you need correct foundational assumptions in order to understand anything. You will not understand anything at all if you don't have the right assumptions going into it. And our assumptions are about, the way the world works. They're often unspoken, but you can't understand anything at all if you don't know what the fundamentals mean. And you just have to accept them on faith. There's a big there's this concept in mathematics that I'm going to butcher, but it's called Gödel's incompleteness theorem, and it's basically says that no system can prove itself, but all systems of logic require certain axiomatic truths that have to be taken just on faith. So mathematics can't prove the truth of mathematics or something to that effect. You just have to take certain things on faith. You just have to take on a basic level that 1 + 1 = 2, and that just is what it is, or something to that effect. But all systems of logic require a base level assumptions. That's what I'm trying to get at. And that base level assumptions about the way the world works, that's our faith, right? Our faith on one level is our most basic assumptions about the world, and how it works and what its purpose is for. But that's just a worldly way of looking at it. There's a spiritual way too, which is that you really need to have faith to encounter spiritual realities. Faith is something that our belief in God is something that allows us to comprehend things without which we can be totally in the dark about and never able to understand or discern. This is a more subtle point that I think is hard to explain, so I'm just going to pass over it. But there's a real spiritual dimension to faith, the ability to understand and approach God. Faith is needed at the ground level, otherwise it's just not happening. Okay, so what's Jesus talking about? Do you not yet understand or remember the 5 loaves of the 5,000, how many baskets you took up, nor the 7 loaves of the 4,000, how many large baskets you took up? How is it that you do not understand that I did not speak to you concerning bread? So this is really interesting, because they had just been through, remember in previous Bible studies, we'd gone over the feeding of the 5,000, we'd gone over the feeding of the 4,000. We've said that, this has XYZ meanings. We broke apart the text, we analyzed what was going on there. And Jesus is directly saying, yes, these events are symbolic. You were supposed to have understood something from them. It's really interesting when he speaks kind of, on one level so directly about it, just saying, yes, it's just as though he came out and said, yes, my words have hidden meanings. Figure them out. Because that's another thing. He does not explain them. Actually, he tells you that there's a hidden meaning to the feeding of the 5,000. There's a hidden meaning to my feeding of the 4,000, but he actually doesn't explain what that meaning was. He just tells you there is one. I think that's really, really interesting, because it's just giving us a template for how we're supposed to approach the things of God. God is cryptic, and God knows he's being cryptic, and that's part of the plan. He wants you to be able to analyze what he's done, and there's a saying in Proverbs that I repeat a lot that's really good. I forget what chapter and verse it is, but it's the glory of God to conceal a matter, and the glory of kings to search it out, or to uncover it, or something. And that is the way God structured the world. He structured our world in the experience of it such that when we're born into the world, we do not have perfect understanding of everything. He built the world that way. He wants our life to be a process of discovering and of learning. Why? Well, one of the reasons is because that very process of discovering and learning is what shapes us. If it were beneficial for us to just give us all the answers to all the truths in the Bible or whatever, then God would have done it. The Bible would have been a very straightforward book. Instead, it's very much not. But part of our relationship with God is God concealed things deliberately because he wants us to find them. He does things in such a way that we need to be analyzing his actions, so on and so forth. So I'm just telling you, notice that Jesus says this directly. Notice that this is intentional about the way God sets things up, because the very process of searching him out, 1, it changes you, and 2, it develops your intimacy with him. Part of becoming more and more intimate with your wife or your husband is you are learning about them more and you are understanding them better. And that doesn't happen all at once. Those of you who are married can attest. But actually, there are a lot of things you learn about someone over time, even years. My wife and I, we just passed our 7th anniversary. And I know that's, short for some of the people on this video. there are things, you find out about your wife after 7 years that you didn't know for the previous 6 years. And that's the same thing with God. To learn about him and to develop true intimacy with him requires effort, requires this process of searching, requires this, and so, yeah. So they understood that they understood that he did not tell them, beware of the leaven of bread, but of the doctrine of the Pharisees and Sadducees. So there's a big connection between bread and teaching in Jesus's own teachings. Remember, when Jesus is being tempted by the devil in chapter 4, verse 3 and 4, the devil, Jesus is very hungry because he's been fasting for 40 days. And the devil says to Jesus, hey, command that these stones become bread so that you have something to eat. And Jesus says, man shall not live by bread alone, but by every word that proceeds from God, from the mouth of God. So that he's clearly drawing a connection. There's some kind of symbolic, thematic connection between bread and the word of God. And what is it? Well, on one level, we can say that true, correct doctrine, what we refer to as orthodoxy, because orthodoxy, we're accustomed to thinking of it, everything that pertains to the Eastern Orthodox Church, of which we are a part. That's true, but in the more basic sense, orthodoxy just means right belief, right doctrine. That's what we think we have. And so true doctrine, true orthodoxy nourishes us the way bread nourishes us. What does bread do? And bread, by the way, for ancient people was considered like the basic food, like the default food. This is, I think I remember even reading in one of the church fathers that they were saying bread is the most superior food. Because I don't know, which I guess we have to agree, right? Because Jesus gave us the Eucharist in the form of bread. But I thought it was really interesting. They were just like totally okay with just ranking foods and saying bread is the best one. It's just modern people don't think in the way. Modern people just think in terms of like, well, whatever you like is best as long as you're getting your vitamins. And Father's like, no, bread is the best. Like, just simple as. There's a connection between what does food do when we get it? Well, we digest it, it becomes part of us and it powers us, right? Part of it, is actually broken down and used to build the cells of your body. All the cells in my body are made up of constituent parts that were at one point eaten by me. It's very weird to think of that, but all of these molecules here that you are looking at were something that I ate at one point. And so doctrine what you believe, what you follow becomes a part of you, and it powers you. That's also what food does. Okay, if you don't eat food for a long enough period of time, you just stop moving, and that kind of is what true doctrine it empowers you. It gives you the ability to move and live and act. And so true doctrine doesn't do that for us physically, but it does do that for us spiritually. I mean, that's what gives us purpose and direction in life, and that's what guides the overall scope of our life. So there's a real depth to the idea that teaching, ideas, doctrine are connected with food, with bread, which is the basic default food. So this is really interesting, like to see all this connection. This, I've said before, bigger insights come from reading the whole Bible, right? Because that connection Jesus draws between bread and the Word of God, that's in a totally different chapter of this gospel. So if you didn't read the whole gospel, you're missing a connection here. But actually, that quote from Jesus, man shall not break, but from every word that proceeds from the mouth of God, that actually comes from Deuteronomy, I believe. So it's actually uniting the whole. Again, reading your Bible as a whole, you're connecting a lot of things that you didn't if you're just reading like little sound bites. We love sound bites, we love snippets, but it's not actually nourishing in the same way. But there's another connection to be drawn, I think, between specifically not just doctrine and bread, but doctrine and yeast. Why? Because yeast or leaven is extremely small, and yet it produces a big effect. But it produces a big effect. It is small and unimpressive, but it produces a big effect slowly over time, and only if it's nourished, right? In order for yeast to activate, you have to feed it a little. So orthodoxy is that. Orthodoxy, the doctrine we follow called orthodoxy, is leaven. It doesn't necessarily produce immediate dramatic changes, but it pervades every level of our being if you give it enough time and if you give it enough nourishment. People come to me because, especially, people who convert or people who, from an Orthodox background who discover their faith later in life, they say, I want I want to be all about orthodoxy. You know, if I'm an accountant, I want to be the most orthodox accountant. How can I be an orthodox accountant? You know, does that mean I do math differently or something like that? No, it doesn't. What you need to do to be an Orthodox accountant is you need to come to church, you need to receive the Eucharist, you need to fast on fasting days, and you need to practice the spiritual disciplines that, you know, we learn about in the Ladder of Divine Ascent. You need to read the Bibles. And when you do that, it's going to slowly penetrate your being. It's not going to be quick. You know, I'm an Orthodox accountant now, so I'm going to do a different type of accounting. I'm going to be the same person I was before. I'm going to do the same job I was before. But over time, I'm just going to be different. I'm not going to be the same person. And somehow I've never been an accountant. You know, I don't really know what goes into it, and I'd probably be pretty bad at it. But I know that what a fully formed Orthodox accountant will do will be significantly different from, you know, someone who does not have that faith. But it's not obvious. It's not about doing a checklist, but it's about living the life and allowing the change just to penetrate your whole being. Just like how the leaven, the yeast, is going to fill the whole dough. The whole dough is going to be filled with lifted up with these pockets of air, because slowly, not quickly and not immediately. So that's why I say people, there was a guy who wrote an article that was circulating among Orthodox converts a little while ago, and he was talking about how he'd been Orthodox for 5 years and he felt totally burnt out. And he was saying he wasn't leaving the church or anything, but he felt that he had done all the spiritual practices he did, and it didn't change him at all. Now, of course, I'm always skeptical when I read this on the internet, because people tend to exaggerate. You know, people will say on the internet, "Oh, I was the most hardcore. I was, you know, fasting and doing 300 prostrations every night." That might completely not have anything to do with reality. You know, so anyone who talks about their level of spiritual practice online, I just I'm not certain, because the people who are really doing it hardcore, they're not telling anybody. But at the same time, progress in Orthodoxy is definitely measured in years, in multiple years. There are certain things I've got and certain experiences I've had that didn't come until after I was a priest, which maybe is not always the way it should be. But I feel definitely my experience of the church has been the experience of leaven. You know, I've been seriously religious for about 14, 15 years now. And, you know, some of the biggest changes in my life didn't come until after year 7 or 8 or something, right? Our church, our faith is real, but it's hard and it's slow. And so don't apply modern expectations to our ancient faith. You know, you will be dramatically different. First of all, if you allow it. It's also possible just to be a member of the Orthodox Church and not actually do anything, and then be like, why am I not different? Well, you know, it's your own fault. But at the same time, it's also possible to go completely hard and go whole hog and feel like you haven't changed at all, when in fact you have, or when the process is very slow. So again, when you're thinking about your own spiritual progress, when you're thinking about what Orthodoxy does to you, think in terms of leaven. That's what you think of in terms of yeast slowly puffing you up. Again, as long as you supply it with nourishment. Don't think of, you know, again, I think people have a very evangelical mindset, and what there's a lot of good to love about the evangelicals. So I'm not just trying to bash them completely, but I think something that sort of evangelical culture pushes that's often not realistic is the idea of instantaneous conversions. That happens sometimes to some people. Some person was a total hardcore evil enemy of God, like St. Paul, completely blaspheming, and then they got down on their knees, they said a prayer, and they woke up and they were no longer addicted to drugs, and they changed their whole life completely. That happens sometimes, but it's pretty rare. Most people operate on a much slower. Most people have a lot harder time kicking bad habits. Most people have a lot slower time changing their mindset or something. So don't. And that idea that it's not just an evangelical idea. I feel like modern culture has taken what was an evangelical Protestant idea and just secularized it. You know, I see it a lot. I see it a lot with you know, transgender subculture. People, when you're dealing with a lot of people from that subculture, they talk about it as though, well, if I just transition, You know, I've lived my whole life as a boy. If I just transition to being female, then my problems will be solved. It'll be the big change and I'll be happy suddenly. And it's very much this evangelical mindset. You just need that conversion moment and then everything will change and then your life will be smooth sailing. And it's just a fiction. It's just a lie. It's most people, whether it comes to religion, whether it comes to sex and gender, whatever, it's just not realistic for most people most of the time. It's yes, that's a really good point. It's consumerism applied to spirituality. If I just get this product, then everything will be easy. Once I have this, it'll be smooth sailing. Most of the time, it's not true. Every once in a while, it's something you really need. But most people, most of the time, we like quick fixes. Anyway, that's it. That's it. I don't want to keep you guys too long. Lord, now let your servant depart in peace according to your word. For my eyes have seen your salvation, which you've prepared in the presence of all people, the light of revelation, the Gentile, and the glory of your people Israel. Amen. God bless you guys. I'll hang around if anyone wants to keep talking or whatever, but I'm ending the recording.